Hello and welcome to this webinar. In it, I'm going to cover the 10 and possibly more most frequently asked questions on 360-degree feedback. You're very welcome. I hope that I'm just getting a message about the stream on LinkedIn, and they're talking about an issue. So I'm not sure if this is coming through or not, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to carry on and very much hope that you can pick this up. Now, what I will do, I will be checking intermittently for some questions. The session will be available as a recording on my LinkedIn profile. And yeah, I look forward to receiving your questions. And if I can't respond to you during the session, I will definitely get back to you to answer your questions. The first question that I get asked about 360 is, when should we use 360? Anytime that you need to get a closer, more in-depth understanding of an individual's skills, their behaviors, and how they work with other people, 360-degree feedback is a great tool for that. And that's because it can measure those things that are hard to measure. So sales figures can be, they are what they are. Behaviors, effects on other people, management, leadership. Am I helping my team to develop? Am I coaching my team? Am I providing leadership for my team or for the organization? Those things are harder to measure. And the effect on other people is how you measure those through 360-degree feedback. And therefore, a 360 tool can be used to support development in an organization. If you've got a development program to build leadership skills or management skills, 360 is ideal for that. It can be used to provide people with a benchmark for future development, for career development. What do they have to achieve? What areas do they need to improve on? What level do they have to reach in order to get to where they want to be in the organization and in their career? So it's ideal for those types of activities: succession planning, talent development, and similar activities. Performance appraisal, yep, 360 can be used to support performance appraisal, but with certain areas of care. I will talk about performance appraisal in 360 a bit later on, but it is certainly an area where 360 is used, and I will also give you some examples of how organizations that I work with use it for performance appraisal. The next question, and sometimes organizations don't ask the question, but it's an important one: is there any time when we shouldn't use 360-degree feedback? Now, there are a couple of occasions where 360 shouldn't be used. One is for pure performance appraisal. If it's the only item that you are using, the only measurement you are using for performance appraisal, it shouldn't be used. And again, I'll talk about that a bit later on. The main area, though, the main time you should never use 360-degree feedback is where you have an issue of a toxic individual in a team. We often get asked, we have someone whose behaviors are inappropriate, they're not helping the team, they're just very difficult people to work with, and we want to sort this issue out. We'd like to 360-degree feedback them. And that's a really bad idea for all sorts of reasons. Firstly, it means that no one has been able so far to sit down with this individual and have a face-to-face conversation with them. That means there are poor relationships already within that group. So that would be the first thing to do before looking at a 360. Also, if you decide to do a 360 on one person, you're kind of announcing to everyone around that this is an issue. The individual will be very negative and very unhappy about it. They're unlikely to take on board the feedback that they get, and they're likely to take it out on the people who've given them feedback. And of course, the people giving the feedback will not be very happy or very confident doing that, particularly if relationships are strained. So as you can see, using 360 in that way is a very bad idea. I would never recommend it. Next question, who should choose the raters in a 360? This is important. Clearly, the people giving the feedback need to be carefully chosen. They should always include the individual's line manager and the individual's direct reports if they manage other people. So direct reports are the people who are in the team of the person who's getting the 360. It's important to ensure that those people get asked for feedback at all times. If only some direct reports are asked, it's going to leave the others feeling left out, feeling resentful, and feeling that they are not in favor with that individual. My recommendation is where someone manages people and we're looking at skills that involve management, then all direct reports should be asked for feedback. The line manager also should be asked, unless there's a very good reason for not including the line manager's feedback there. The other individuals that should be asked or could be asked would be peers. So peers of that person, they may be in the same team, or they may be within a community, professional community, are also useful to ask in a 360. Potentially customers and clients, if you have a good relationship with them and you tell them in advance that they're going to be asked. Now, you could pre-choose those people for the individual, and it's quite a good idea to pre-choose them. So not give the individual an option to choose the direct reports and the line manager. It's a good idea, though, to include the individual, the person getting the feedback, the ratee, ask them if they want to ask other people, potentially that don't have a formal relationship with them in the workplace, but who they've worked with and who they could possibly get some good feedback from. When I say getting good feedback from, I mean someone that they've worked with over maybe 6 months or a year, not just the last few weeks, and someone that is in a position to be able to observe their skills and behaviors, as that's going to be asked in the 360. And which colleagues should give feedback? I've mentioned those working relationships, direct reports, managers, but also others. And it should be something you can do with your 360, that you can include relationships specific to your organization. So you may have some reporting lines, or you may have some working relationships in your organization. For instance, some of our organizations ask for feedback from stakeholders, and that is very much built around their business model. So they have what are called stakeholders in the business. So that group is asked for feedback, and their feedback appears aggregated in the individual's report. Next item, next frequently asked question, and this is very much frequently asked, is how many questions to include in a 360 feedback questionnaire. And this is a great one. I've seen, I think the longest questionnaire I've ever seen, or proposed questionnaire, was 170 questions. So you can imagine if you've been asked to answer 170 ratings questions on someone. Think about it if you've been asked to give feedback on 3 people in your team, or even 10 people if you are their line manager. You can imagine the effect on your feedback, on your morale having to do that. So have a think about the quality of the feedback that you're getting. And I've found over the years that the quality of the feedback decreases the longer your questionnaire is. Therefore, our recommendation is always probably a maximum of 30 to 35 rating questions at most, possibly some written opportunity for written answers would bring it up to 40 at the absolute longest. I would not run a 360 with more than 40 questions in total. And that tends to work quite well. if you have, say, 6 competency areas, within each of those, maybe 5 statements describing that competency gives you 30, and then potentially a few other written questions to give some examples. Or you can use the start, stop, continue model. So you can ask people to write their answers based on what they would like their colleague to start doing, stop doing, and continue doing, bringing it up to 35 to 40 questions. What rating scale should you use? Very frequently asked about this. It very much depends on the questions that you're asking and the purpose of your 360. So if your 360 is about development needs, your rating scale could be a rating scale of 5 points, and it could be labeled at the lowest end, it could be needs development, and at the higher end, it could be is a role model. Now, that's a good rating scale to use specifically for development. My recommended rating scale, unless you have a specific reason for using a different one, is a rating scale that measures how frequently you have seen the person carry out this skill or behavior. And this works really well because, first of all, it's not a judgment on that individual's performance or your view of their personality. So with a rating scale that's built on frequency, you start with how frequently do you see the person doing this behavior. So one end of the scale would be never or almost never, and the top of the scale would be always or almost always. And what's great about this scale is, as I said, you're not judging the person and you're not judging their performance. So it works well when you're feeding back to senior people. Senior people can sometimes say, I don't need 360 feedback from the people around me or below me. I know how to do my job. But actually what we're talking about here is we're not talking about how good you are, but just how frequently people see you doing these things. So I would recommend that, although there are other scales that you can use. And points, rating scale points, we often get asked. A 5-point scale is good. It gives people enough range to feed back without making it too, I suppose, diluted. And a 4-point scale is good. A 4-point scale doesn't give people a middle point. It kind of says yes or no. And that works quite well. The other point I would make about rating scale is I would always include a rating point that says no opportunity to observe. Sometimes I get asked whether this is a get out. So people will point to this will choose this when they don't want to answer. And I don't think that's right, because I think it's better to give people the opportunity to say, I haven't been in a position to observe this. If you don't give them that opportunity, they will choose one of the other points on the scale, and that might not be right. It may be that they don't actually always or never see that. They're just not in the position to even observe it. So that would be my recommendation on rating scale. Next question, are numerical ratings better than written feedback or the other way around? So as you'll know, with a 360, you can have individual statements and a rating scale like we've just been talking about. So the statement would say, for example, Joe delegates stretching tasks in my team, or Joe delegates great tasks to me to help my development. So the basis around having those rating items is that everyone answers the same question or rates the same question. So you get consistency of focus from everyone who is feeding back. And that's why rating questions in a 360 are important. It allows you to measure the same things, the same items, and then to compare them, because the report that comes out from that feedback process is a report that aggregates the feedback from each of the groups of reviewers, that is direct reports, peers, etc., and compares them to each other and compares them to the individual's self-review, which is also very important because it gives them a chance to reflect. So that's why ratings are important. On the other hand, you can also ask for written feedback in a 360. So you can ask people to provide examples of what they have observed, and that helps to give more context to the feedback. Ratings on their own are not as good as ratings with text, because ratings on their own are just a number, and therefore what do you do with that information? It's much better to have examples together with the ratings so that you get a much fuller picture of the feedback for that individual. Written feedback on its own, I've seen that used, and that is helpful. But what it tends to do is it's more individual, so there's less ability to measure the feedback against each other to make sure that there are consistent messages coming through. So our recommendation would be use ratings questions and use text questions and the ability to write free text as well. Next question. Yeah, we often get asked, should 360 feedback always be shown anonymously? And the research and the advice from the people who have looked at this in great detail is that 360 should be shown anonymously. The people giving feedback are more likely to be honest with their feedback if they are not going to be named as the person giving that feedback. And that makes a lot of sense. You've got maybe people feeding to their boss, giving feedback on their boss, giving feedback on their boss's boss. You know, these people have influence on their careers and their day-to-day work. So it's going to be hard for them to really be honest with their feedback if they think their feedback is going to be identified. It's great if you've got a culture of feedback already in place in the organization where people are very comfortable giving named feedback to each other and to their bosses. And we often say, if you want to identify your feedback, that's great. So if you want to put your name at the end of a comment because you want the person to know that you've given them that feedback, that's absolutely brilliant. And that feedback will really help that individual, and you guys will be able to have a great conversation about it. That's not necessarily going to be the case in every situation and in every team or in every organization. So do bear in mind that the best practice for 360-degree feedback is for it to be shown anonymously. Next question is, should we use 360 for performance appraisal? Now, yes is the answer. It can be used for performance appraisal. Not everyone agrees with that. I would say we can use it, but with very specific rules around it. The reason why there are rules around using 360 for performance appraisal is that clearly in a performance appraisal, certain decisions are made about an individual's promotion prospects, potential pay rises, all sorts of key decisions are made based on a performance appraisal. You shouldn't base your performance appraisal rating solely on a 360 because the feedback is anonymous. Therefore, you might get the person challenging your decision or your rating and saying, if you can't tell me who has said this, where this has come from, then I'm challenging the rating that you've given me and the decision that's coming out of that rating. On that basis, then, I would say use the 360 as part of the performance appraisal discussion. We work with organizations who do exactly that. They use the 360 to help to gather feedback on KPIs as well as on behaviors and values. But what they do, they then take that data and they then sit down and they look at the data for each individual, and they may change that based on their judgment as a management team. So they're very careful not to use just the ratings that come through from the 360 as their final rating. So there's a judgment involved based on the feedback, but also on the knowledge of the people who are doing the performance appraisal. The other way of using 360 as part of performance appraisal is to slightly separate it from those decisions. And you can do that using it as a development piece. So part of the performance appraisal, of course, is to discuss that individual's development needs for the coming year or 6 months. So the 360 is a great tool for helping the line manager to have that discussion. And in that case, I would suggest you run the 360 maybe a couple of months before the performance appraisal. Not too long, of course, but enough time to separate it from the performance review. So people who are giving the feedback understand that they're not appraising that individual, they're talking about their development. Another question, how frequently should we do 360-degree feedback? Can we do it more than once a year? You can do 360 whenever is appropriate for the activity or for the process that you wanted to support. 360 can take up quite a bit of time in the organization. If you're doing a major 360 for everyone, I would suggest you do that once a year. I would suggest then that maybe 6 months down the line, you might do a mini 360 to find out how they're getting on, following up from the first 360. Or you might do tiny pulse 360s maybe every quarter with a very short version of the full 360. One organization we work with is finding that the individual gets their first 360, their main 360 at the beginning of the year. They then are able to focus on certain development points, which they identify. Then their mini 360, which is 3 months later, just focuses on those items that they are developing. So it really gives them a nice focus on how they're doing on that particular area or value. So they are they're 10 questions. Now, it looks like my stream isn't showing up on LinkedIn, so we have a technical issue. So I will sign off on this, and I will see whether I can make this available as a recorded webinar. There may or may not be questions on LinkedIn. If nobody's actually watching this, there won't be any questions. So technical hitch, it looks like. I'm being told that LinkedIn are working to fix it, so they may have scuppered the whole thing. Thanks, LinkedIn. I'm really hoping that I can do something with this webinar and share it with you. If you are watching this and you have watched it through, please send me any questions you have. Just direct message me or just send it to me on my LinkedIn post. For more information, direct message me. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. And I really hope that you've been able to see this webinar. Thanks. Bye-bye.